Have you ever felt like you're just drifting through life? Who am I? Why was I created? What's my purpose? What are we here to do? You wake up, work 9 to 5, scroll on your phone, sleep, and repeat, wondering, is this it? Is this what life is all about? Why do I feel the way I do? Recognizing this feeling doesn't bring calm. Quite the opposite, in fact. It opens up a meaningless void. If you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. Leo Tolstoy, one of history's greatest writers and the legendary author of War and Peace and Anna Karenina, faced the same crisis. Orphaned at a young age and raised by relatives, Leo started asking questions about God, life, and death way earlier than most children. Tolstoy was born into the highest circles of royal society. He held the title of Count. He grew up surrounded by unimaginable luxury, with servants attending to his every need from morning to night. For almost 50 years, Tolstoy appeared to live the perfect life. He got married and had 13 children. He owned vast estates, larger than some towns. Critics hailed him as a genius, and famous figures from around the world traveled just to meet him. Isn't that everything society tells us should make us happy? But at the age of 50, Tolstoy faced an overwhelming existential crisis. Remember those big questions he had as a kid? About God, life, and death? They never really went away. They just lingered, waiting. Then, at 50, it all came crashing down on him. Tolstoy was someone who deeply loved earthly pleasures, but at the same time, he had an intensely overdeveloped conscience that made him suffer. I suppose we all feel this split between spirit and flesh, but for Tolstoy, it was extreme. As the young Leo Tolstoy wrestled with himself, he began keeping a diary. He wrote, "My question was the simplest of questions, lying in the soul of every man, from the foolish child to the wisest elder. It was a question without an answer, to which one cannot live, as I had found by experience. It was, what will come of what I'm doing today or shall do tomorrow? What will come of my whole life?" Differently expressed, the question is, why should I live? Why wish for anything or do anything? It can also be expressed thus, is there any meaning in my life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy? Even considering his own fame, he says, very well, you will be more famous than Gogol, Pushkin, Shakespeare, Moliere, more famous than all the writers in the world. So what? And I could find absolutely no reply. In his novels, Tolstoy gave his characters answers to life's big questions, but found none for himself, sinking into deep depression. His despair ran deeper than creative exhaustion. Soon, he lost interest in writing just to entertain or feed readers' escapist desires. But even with his growing dislike for writing, he faced his crisis the only way he knew, by writing. And the result was his deeply personal work, a confession. In it, he shared a powerful parable that captured his inner turmoil. It's an old tale about a traveler being chased by a wild beast. Desperate, he jumps into a dry well, only to find a dragon waiting below, with its jaws wide open. Panicking, he clings to a twig growing from the well's wall, stuck between the beast above and the dragon below. In the middle of this hopeless situation, the man spots a few drops of honey on the twig's leaves. Reaching out, he tastes it and enjoys its sweetness. Tolstoy saw himself in this traveler. He too was caught between two extremes, facing the wild beast of existential dread above him, the dragon of death below, and the drop of honey in front of him, representing the deceptive joys of life that no longer brought him pleasure. Tolstoy wasn't just struggling with depression or a personal crisis. He was facing something deeper. So what did he do? He decided to embark on a journey to search for the meaning of life. He read every philosophy book he could get his hands on, Socrates, Buddha, Solomon, and Schopenhauer. But they all seemed to lead to one conclusion. Happier is the one who's never been born. Death is better than life, and we must free ourselves from life. Next, he turned to science, hoping Darwin had the answers. But instead, it only made him feel worse. If we're all just an accident, random bits of energy floating around, then what's the point? We come from nothing and return to nothing, our value only lasting while we're healthy, destined for death. No book, philosopher, or scientist could give him a reason to live that death couldn't take away. That's when Tolstoy stumbled upon something unexpected. Tolstoy started studying the people around him. Rich, poor, happy, sad, trying to see how they handled the same questions that were driving him crazy. After much reflection, he found 4 ways people tried to find meaning. And once he saw the patterns, well, there was no unseeing them. The first group was the blissfully ignorant, those who had fully accepted the absurdity of life. These people didn't even think about life's meaning. They were too busy living, waking up, working, hanging out with friends. No existential dread, no late-night overthinking. Instead of giving in to despair or nihilism when faced with life's absurdity, they responded with defiance and resilience. They approached life with the mindset of, so what? Life's hard enough without asking big questions, right? The second group of people were pleasure seekers. They were the ones who knew life had no real meaning, so they decided to enjoy it while it lasted. They drowned themselves in distractions and immediate gratification. Wealth, power, success, entertainment. Like the man in the well, they kept themselves distracted by the drops of honey. Sweet for a moment, but ultimately just a distraction from the harsh reality of life. Tolstoy knew this group all too well, because he was one of them. Deep down, these people knew it was all temporary, and no amount of indulgence can resolve the ultimate existential questions. The third group stared into the void, unable to find any meaning. They were overwhelmed by the absurdity of existence and saw no way out. The weight of life's emptiness crushed them. Some suffered in silence, while others simply couldn't bear it any longer and decided to give up. In the face of life's struggles, these people lacked the strength to carry on. This was the darkest path, and Tolstoy knew that this too was not the solution. For him, living meant continuing to search and not letting the darkness consume you. Finally, the fourth group was made up of people in a state of existential limbo. They saw the truth but felt stuck between 2 extremes. They recognized life's meaninglessness, its suffering, the certainty of death, and the lack of purpose, but lacked the strength and energy to do anything about it. These people remain inactive, frozen in place. They're aware of life's deeper questions and sense that there's more to existence, but they choose to stay silent, leaving them spiritually drained. Tolstoy saw this as the weakest way to live, offering no answers and no forward movement. Disillusioned with all 4 types, Tolstoy had a deep realization. One day, while walking around his huge estate, Tolstoy noticed something strange. The peasants, who had nothing, seemed happier and more content than he was. These people lived hard lives, small homes, barely enough to eat, working from dawn till dusk, but somehow they seemed content. In fact, they appeared at peace. When hardship struck, they supported each other, and when crops failed, they worked even harder the next season. In contrast, Tolstoy was lost in intellectual uncertainties, buried in fancy philosophy books and grappling with big questions about the meaning of life. Tolstoy wrote, "In contrast with what I had seen in our circle, where the whole of life is passed in idleness, amusement, and dissatisfaction, I saw that the whole life of these people was passed in heavy labor and that they were content with life. In contradistinction to the way in which people of our circle oppose fate and complain of it on account of deprivations and sufferings, these people accepted illness and sorrow without any perplexity or opposition, and with a quiet and firm conviction that all is good. In contradistinction to us, who the wiser we are, the less we understand the meaning of life, and see some evil irony in the fact that we suffer and die. These folk live and suffer, and they approach death and suffering with tranquility, and in most cases, gladly. Contemplating his own life, he wrote, "But what had I done during the whole 30 years of my responsible life? Far from producing sustenance for all, I did not even produce it for myself. I lived as a parasite, and on asking myself, what is the use of my life? I got the reply, no use." Tolstoy realized that these simple people lived with meaning because they believed in something greater than themselves. They weren't paralyzed by the fear of death because they saw life as part of something eternal. They had something he didn't: faith in God, a higher power. The key to Tolstoy's quest was faith, but not the traditional kind practiced by his self-indulgent peers and so-called believers who lived in comfort, yet remained consumed by a fear of suffering and death. Tolstoy's faith was the faith of the common people, found outside the church. This realization marked a profound turning point for Tolstoy. Soon, Tolstoy underwent a drastic transformation. He abandoned his old life, gave up wealth, status, and possessions, which left his family both concerned and angry. He started living simply, embracing faith, and dedicating his life to helping others. He stopped dressing in fancy clothes and started doing the hard work himself, plowing the fields, carrying water, chopping firewood. Tolstoy's actions were driven by a deep belief that a simple life was closely tied to the purity of the soul. He also spoke out against war, condemning it publicly. He came to realize that faith in the infinite was the key to transcending the constraints of the finite world. "Live seeking God, and then you will not live without God," exclaimed a voice within him. And more than ever before, all within me and around me lit up, and the light did not again abandon me, Tolstoy writes. After this period of struggle and adjustment, Tolstoy overcame his despair by embracing faith and living a humble life. In the end, he found lasting peace. And on November 20th, 1910, at the age of 82, he passed away. In a world where everything seems to be falling apart, have you ever felt the urge to search for the meaning of life?